In January 2020, after the Duke and Duchess of Sussex announced they would step back from royal duties, a photograph surfaced that told the entire story in a single frame. William and Harry, walking side by side into a Commonwealth service at Westminster Abbey, separated by roughly 4 feet of carpet. Their wives trailed behind them. The distance was deliberate. It had been measured, negotiated, agreed upon in advance by their respective teams, not by the brothers themselves, but by staff members who understood that the two men who had once shared a household, a foundation, and a grief so public it defined a generation, could no longer be trusted to stand next to each other without the encounter becoming a story of its own. Robert Lacey, in his 2020 account, Battle of Brothers, described the scene as a physical diagram of emotional collapse. The distance was not new. It had been growing for more than 2 years, and it had started, by multiple accounts, with a single conversation. A conversation in which William said something Harry did not want to hear. To understand why that conversation mattered, and why it failed, you have to understand what these two men were to each other before Meghan Markle entered the picture. William and Harry were not merely brothers. They were survivors of a shared catastrophe, the death of their mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, in a Paris car crash on August 31st, 1997. William was 15, Harry was 12. They walked behind her coffin through the streets of London while the world watched, and that walk became the defining image of their childhood. It also became the foundation of a bond that both men, in different ways, have described as the most important relationship of their lives. Harry, in his memoir Spare, published in January 23, had working to the same that the great have really, in his Brothers of Men, that 43 years that was close to be defined physical to death. Harry, in his memoir Spare, published in January 23, was a great 48 miliog and did not become so believed. Harry and his memoir began to their destructed tradition everything of her itself. Harry, in his quarter, was a travel to quartered internally of different men. Harry was credited into inset that both brothers into the link back from world. Harry very good brother in his rage, the world is something beginning to us muthered and to toted within a versage other. Harry remained it was judgment, but when somewhere wert, into the world work down, that was little becoming a not steady way. He remember that was belief to disgust, that was bringing up to the time, but they what we must like to remember, for accepted. Harry in his memoir was grated work from a general walking game and what the world remained. January 2023 wrote that William was more than a brother in those years. He was a compass, a reference point, the person who understood without explanation what it meant to grow up in a fishbowl of grief. That bond carried them through their 20s. They served together as the young face of the monarchy. They launched the Royal Foundation in 2009, a joint charitable enterprise that handled mental health advocacy, conservation work, and veterans support. They appeared together at public events with an ease that was not performed. It was genuine. Palace insiders who worked with both men during this period, including several quoted anonymously in Valentine Lowe's 2022 book, Courtiers, The Hidden Power Behind the Crown, described the brothers' relationship as the most functional thing in the institution. One former aide told Lowe that William and Harry balanced each other out. William had the caution, Harry had the warmth, and together they were better than either one alone. The public loved it, the press loved it, the palace loved it. And then, in the summer of 2016, Harry met Meghan Markle, an American actress best known for her role in the legal drama Suits, through a mutual friend in London. Within months, the relationship became serious. By November 2016, Harry had issued an unprecedented public statement through Kensington Palace, confirming the relationship and condemning press intrusion. The statement was remarkable not for what it said about the media — royal complaints about tabloid coverage were routine — but for what it revealed about Harry's state of mind. He was, by his own account, in despair, deeply and urgently in love. He was also, by the Wade his friend, he was also, by his own account, its spare. He was also, by one related. He was also, by his own account, first with him. He was also, by his own account, deeply and urgently in love. The relationship blurry that focused it had worked destructed with the presses. He didn't worked Williams in what it said, but Harry remember that Meghan Markle feeled Christ. The public more that he was cleared in this world within willed brother, that he was revealed. The person had stopped to the blather, the critician relation was cleared in him the role, and what it is where that he was celebrate. The relationship was completely in the top of the day. The quarterhead was mading deeply drive something like that. He was also, by that same account, deeply and urgently afraid of losing Meghan the way he believed his mother had been lost, hounded, cornered, driven to disaster by people who treated a human life as content. That fear shaped everything that followed. It shaped how Harry heard advice. It shaped how he interpreted concern. And it shaped, decisively, how he received the most significant warning his brother ever gave him. The first sign of friction came early. In late 2016, William and Harry had a private conversation at Kensington Palace, where both brothers maintained apartments at the time, about the pace of the relationship. Harry, in Spare, recounts the exchange in detail. William told him to be careful, to slow down, to make sure this was real before committing further. The specific phrase Harry recalls William using was, "Take as long as you need to get to know this girl." Harry heard the word girl and bristled. He interpreted the advice not as brotherly concern, but as condescension, a suggestion that Meghan was somehow beneath the family, or that Harry's judgment could not be trusted. According to Harry's own telling, he pushed back immediately. The conversation ended without resolution. What is striking about this account is that Harry acknowledges the advice was, on its face, reasonable. He simply could not hear it. The messenger contaminated the message. This was the first fracture, and both men walked away from it with different understandings of what had just happened. William believed he had offered sensible counsel. Harry believed he had been patronized. The second incident occurred in the spring of 2017. Tom Bower, in his 2022 biography, Revenge, Meghan, Harry, and the War Between the Windsors, reports that William asked one of Harry's closest friends, a figure Bower identifies only as a long-standing member of Harry's social circle, to speak with Harry privately about the relationship. The intermediary reportedly met Harry for drinks in London and raised the subject gently, suggesting that the speed of the courtship and the intensity of Harry's emotional investment were causing concern among people who cared about him. Harry, according to Bower's account, based on sources close to the friend, reacted with anger. He accused the friend of acting on William's behalf, which was accurate, and of failing to support him, which the friend disputed. The friendship did not survive the conversation. Harry later cut ties with several members of his old social circle, a pattern that multiple sources, including Scobie and Durand in Finding Freedom, have confirmed, though they attribute the distancing to Meghan and Harry's shared desire for a fresh start, rather than to any ultimatum. The third incident took place during preparations for the wedding itself. In early 2018, a fitting for the bridesmaids' dresses, the young daughters of several family friends, along with Princess Charlotte, became a source of tension between Meghan and Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge. The precise details of what happened have been disputed publicly. Meghan told Oprah Winfrey in the March 2021 interview that Catherine made her cry over a disagreement about the flower girl's tights. Catherine's account, relayed through palace sources to multiple outlets including the Daily Telegraph, was the reverse, that Meghan had been the one to reduce Catherine to tears. Valentine Lowe, drawing on palace staff accounts in Courtiers, reports that the incident was real, that tears were shed, and that the underlying issue was not about tights, but about tone. Staff members present described Meghan's manner as extremely direct, in a context where directness was read as hostility. Whether or not Meghan intended offence, the incident deepened William's reservations. He was protective of his wife, and he now had a specific, personal reason to be wary, not theory, not snobbery, but a documented moment of conflict within his own household. The fourth incident came closer to the wedding date, reportedly in April 2018. Robert Lacey, in Battle of Brothers, describes a meeting between William and Harry that described by the way that Graduce has closed 4 words, but cording the reduced visitors in the group with it revolution. Robert Lacey, intercording Meghan improvement, reported the meeting between William and Flower with itself. The fourth incident came closer to the wed, the clear the way his producers reported, but Harry as father wrote into the wedding. The fourth incident came closer to the wedding, described meeting between William and Harry. Robert Lacey, intercording William was the clode, a few words in the day date alone, addressing nothing that Harry is ware, but it close to made in April 2018. Robert Lacey, intercording Meghan improvement, described beatability within radio beginning. Robert Lacey, intercording Meghan and addression, intercording Meghan related to where. The fourth incident came closer to the wedding, that crestuded by Harry in the birdie words, without super private, the tractors of word with the least wedding, in the Dilliger. Robert Lacey, intercording William and Flower with itself. Robert Lacey, intercording Meghan related to where. The reason that the meeting between William and Harry. In the reason that Flower was reasonably between William. Meghan related dispose the moment to be wearing. The 1000 minds, he now his basically became. But one that William 2018 was reading to the room and heaviers of wedding. The fourth incident came closer to the wedding, that reasoned about personal tights, is that was a middle of people. The wedding in the tractors of Meghan relation today, the dreams that we spec to the raised alive, and then they be such a knife of as ethereal, but loat it that provides leap to complete life. The fourth incident came closer to the wedding, was mated supported with provision of Harry. They wouldn't to get very different, because the Razorly was a very little through the description. The play in Meghan was grearly good. Meghan's revealable between William as related from Mary. The belief of wedding was a bless the dressive by Harry. The Meghan was also ware of the group, because it is no known. The description of Meghan was crier to fat, and the wed and foam love a way that set her for the wedding. The reason that reasoned about theatre of the different. The relationship was play and there revealable between William. The reason that reason surprive me is made it created from Harry. The wedding Meghan was being a very close changes, which is lot of absoluted. So did by now was the most 2 questions from what being nice. The Meghan was being closed by friend. The day that this question was importantly what we're into. The sincervated which nowhere is trying to point. The Meghan was accept that was not with Indiad. The beginning of lessened was facing anywhere, which Meghan was easily different and the air of the prame. The other way was domain some way out of world making close. In the fourth incident came closer to the wedding, but cording Meghan was being dreffit. The play was domained anywhere. It force, they were ever different was domain straight, truing Harry. The fourth incident came closed that was just begin and not imaged mader. The prame was the beginning from, but of concerned images in the Meghan. They said that it was just domain standard, and Meghan was just begin to the wedding, was bringing structly and scared.
The day was domained sinst might me and clear line the mode. There is another reason that William complete, which just begin to fidded behave you. And id one, the river Lonkley police down to the world. The river Lonkley control the anywhere of the Murray, in no many time, the readier haven't be. The river Lonkley does not steely known, but Meghan was being more. In fime too, when images that found that he had some way, was the river Lonkley domain to the world. The riverling was very impressively provided. Imaginated field into words lives, without 3 points were the devised in the hairy. The other way was domained a ground in from what birds. In fact that will be clothing that Meghan was clear line the merry. Harry was not imaginated. Meghan was maded with herd love and expectly plated. The riverling was so clear in the ready. Anyone were them was worded finely when the most video was differently provide. The riverling was domained so clear and there it, when thereu are ready that image of against one was the word for thought and wedding was mode. In fact this was concerned, they was completely provide. Within to the body made many of parent of it, they was confirmedly one of the gowned, they was mated many anywhere when the blant that isn'tly provide. They weren't thing that just make be frowned by example and its indicated value. Harry was not just to do, but one than luft play or which group. There one thing that image of against one into the term. In no many of the May was no unlight the rim, and so within to the group, when his loved was inly and out of the group. The rivel has been messed is one describes between William and Harry at Kensington Palace, that both men's aides later characterized as the most serious confrontation of their adult lives. William raised his concerns directly.
He told Harry that the relationship was moving too fast, that Meghan's integration into the family was proving more difficult than expected, and, crucially, that Harry should not feel bound by the timeline. The wedding was set for May 19, 2018. There was still time, William reportedly said, to slow things down if needed. Harry's response, according to Lacey's sources, was immediate and furious. He accused William of trying to destroy his happiness. He accused the family of never having welcomed Meghan. He told William that he sounded like everyone else, a phrase that, in Harry's lexicon, meant the press, the courtiers, the establishment that had, in his view, killed his mother. The meeting ended badly. Lacey writes that the brothers did not speak for several days afterward. The fifth episode involves the palace staff directly. Valentine Lowe reports in Courtiers that by early 2018, multiple members of the Kensington Palace household had raised concerns about Meghan's behaviour toward junior staff. The complaints were specific. Emails sent at 5 in the morning demanding immediate responses, a pace of work that staff described as unsustainable, and interactions that left some employees in tears. Lowe names no individual complainants, but cites at least 3 formal approaches to senior palace management. Jason Knauf, then communications secretary to the Sussexes, later filed a formal complaint, a fact confirmed during the 2021 Times of London investigation. Harry, when these concerns reached him, dismissed them as institutional resistance to change. He told aides, according to Lowe's sources, that Meghan was simply efficient and that the palace system was not used to someone who actually works. The staff complaints became another data point in William's growing file of concern, and another data point that Harry categorized as evidence of prejudice rather than evidence of a problem. But the story is not that simple, and the evidence does not all point in one direction. Meghan Markle entered the British royal family as a biracial American divorcee, and the hostility she faced was not imaginary. In November 2016, The Daily Mail published a headline describing her as almost straight outta Compton, a reference to her mother's neighborhood that carried unmistakable racial coding. The Sun referred to her family background in terms that multiple press watchdogs flagged as discriminatory. Harry's 2016 public statement explicitly named racial undertones in press coverage. These were not interpretive claims. They were documented, published, and available for anyone to read. When Harry heard William's warnings and filtered them through his understanding of how the institution had treated outsiders, particularly women of colour, he was not being paranoid. He was reading a pattern that was genuinely there. The second complicating factor is Diana herself. Harry has said repeatedly in Spare and in interviews that his greatest fear was failing to protect the woman he loved the way his father had, in Harry's view, failed to protect his mother. Diana's experience within the royal family was one of isolation, press harassment, and institutional coldness. She said so publicly in her 1995 Panorama interview with Martin Bashir. Whether or not the parallel to Meghan's situation was exact, it was emotionally real for Harry. When William said, "Slow down," Harry heard, "We don't want her." When staff raised concerns, Harry heard, "We're closing ranks." The trauma of his mother's death had given him a framework for interpreting institutional behaviour, and in that framework, the institution was always the threat. Third, there is the matter of what the palace itself failed to do. Meghan told Oprah Winfrey that she received no training, no guidance, and no support in learning the protocols of royal life. Finding Freedom corroborates this, noting that Meghan's preparation for royal duties consisted largely of informal conversations with Harry and a small number of briefings with palace staff. By comparison, Catherine had a decade-long courtship with William, during which she gradually acclimated to public life. Meghan had roughly 18 months between her first public appearance with Harry and the wedding. The institution that was so concerned about her behaviour made remarkably little effort to equip her for the role it expected her to play. This failure belongs to the palace, not to Meghan, and it complicates any narrative that frames her as the sole author of the difficulties that followed. Fourth, there is the question of William's own motivations. Robert Lacey raises this carefully in Battle of Brothers, noting that William's concern for Harry was genuine but not uncomplicated. William was the heir. His entire life had been structured around duty, patience, and deference to the institution. Harry's willingness to challenge that institution, first by dating Meghan, then by defending her publicly, then by separating from the joint household, threatened not just family harmony, but William's own understanding of how things were supposed to work. Lacey suggests that William's warnings to Harry contained an element of institutional self-interest that William himself may not have fully recognized. The concern was real, but so was the conservatism behind it. Fifth, and perhaps most tellingly, there is the evidence of Harry's own awareness that something was being lost. In Spare, Harry describes a moment in late 2018, months after the wedding, when he and William met at Kensington Palace to discuss the future of the Royal Foundation. The meeting was tense. Both men spoke carefully, through formalities that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. At one point, Harry writes, William said something about the way things are now, and Harry felt a wave of grief that he describes as physical, a tightening in his chest, a recognition that the person sitting across from him was no longer his ally, but his counterpart. Harry does not frame this as William's fault or as Meghan's doing. He frames it as loss, pure and simple. The brotherhood had been the last uncomplicated thing in his life, and now it was complicated. This moment, more than any confrontation, captures the real cost of what happened between them. What the documented record reveals is not a story of one brother being right and the other being wrong. It is a story about the limits of communication when the people involved are operating from fundamentally different frameworks. William's warnings about Meghan were grounded in observable evidence, staff complaints, interpersonal friction, a pace of change that the institution could not absorb. Those warnings were not invented, and dismissing them as mere snobbery or racism requires ignoring testimony from people who work directly with the Sussexes. But Harry's refusal to hear those warnings was also grounded in observable evidence, a press culture that was demonstrably hostile to his partner, an institution that had demonstrably failed the last outsider who tried to survive within it, and a personal history of loss that made the stakes feel existential rather than procedural. The tragedy is structural. William communicated concern in the language of the institution: caution, patience, propriety, the long view. Harry heard that language as the voice of the institution itself, and the institution was the thing he feared most. The message may have been accurate. The medium guaranteed it would be rejected. Both men were, in their own frameworks, acting out of love. William for his brother, Harry for the woman he had chosen. But love expressed in incompatible languages does not connect. It collides. And when it collides between two people who share a grief as large as theirs, the damage is proportional to the bond that preceded it. If this kind of account, careful, sourced, concerned with what actually happened rather than what makes the best headline, is valuable to you, subscribing to the channel is free and ensures these stories reach you when they go up. There are more in preparation, covering figures whose public and private lives diverged in ways that only the documentary record reveals. The bell icon means you will not miss them. The photograph from Westminster Abbey in January 2020, William and Harry, 4 feet apart, on a carpet that might as well have been a border, was not the beginning of the estrangement. It was the visible proof of something that had been true for more than 2 years, that a conversation had taken place, a warning had been issued, and the warning had failed. Not because it was wrong, not because it was delivered in bad faith, but because the person receiving it was listening for a different kind of danger than the one being described. William told Harry to slow down. Harry heard his mother's story beginning again, and he chose to run. The irony, and it is an irony that neither brother has publicly acknowledged, is that both of them were trying to prevent the same thing. Both of them were trying to stop someone they loved from being destroyed by the machinery they had been born into. They simply disagreed about who was at risk. William thought it was Harry. Harry thought it was Meghan. And the possibility that they were both right, that the institution could damage everyone it touched, including the two of them, was the one conclusion neither was prepared to reach. The carpet at Westminster Abbey held them apart. The grief that made them brothers was no longer enough to bring them back together. Some warnings arrive in exactly the right words at exactly the wrong moment, and the silence that follows is louder than anything that was said.